My name is Mervyn. The thoughts that I am about to share with you are based on my own experience and don't necessarily reflect the views of the RSCDS or other teachers. I've been teaching the Berkshire, Hampshire and Surrey border branch mixed class for the past 16 years. It's been a long time, but I still have the same enthusiasm as I did when I first started teaching the class. The class is weekly, 2 hours in duration, and is held in a church hall. There is ample parking, good facilities, including a kitchen and a wooden floor suitable for our dance genre. The class consists of people ranging in age from 30 to 90. Attendees pay on the night, £3 for RSCDS members and £4 for non-members, including a hot drink and biscuits at half-time. Before the pandemic, up to 32 dancers came to the class, but since we returned in September 2021, that number has dropped to between 14 and 20. Some branches can hold graded classes, but they are becoming rare. Many smaller branches only have one mixed ability class. There are methods enabling everyone to enjoy the class, which I shall discuss later. The mixed class is the most challenging class to teach. The difficulty is ensuring that everyone benefits from the class. With the continual fall in numbers, all branches are trying to attract new dancers. Some beginners become hooked and will continue dancing for many years. Over the last decade, I have noticed that some new dancers will stay for a term or a year and then move on to something else. This is very frustrating when the teacher and other dancers have nurtured them. Although it is essential to have a steady flow of new dancers, I sometimes feel that the experienced dancers are not given the respect they deserve. It is important to remember that these people have loyally supported the class over the years and usually help beginners and less experienced dancers. The title of this talk is Teaching and Management of a Mixed Class. The word class implies that the session involves teaching dancing rather than teaching dances. A well-structured class starts with a warm-up, followed by step practice, skills exercises, main formations from the dances being taught, and dances. The number will depend on the depth of teaching for each dance, and finally, a cool-down. The foremost problem with the mixed class is the different levels of ability. My class attracted upper intermediate to very experienced dancers for many years. The branch organised a separate beginners class, and when they had mastered the rhythm of the steps, could dance basic formations and assimilate easy dances, were integrated into the mixed class. Since lockdown, numbers have decreased. The branch can no longer support a beginners class. However, elementary tuition is provided 30 minutes before the main class starts, and beginners stay on for another hour. Most beginners find that 1.5 hours is the most they can manage mentally and physically. The experienced dancers and other teachers are very willing to partner new dancers. This is especially helpful to instill correct rhythm and guidance in the dances. For example, when dancing the quick time poussette, an experienced dancer with good rhythm can help a beginner achieve and maintain this. My mixed class follows a similar plan each week. The first hour starts with a warm-up. The exercises must be suitable for all levels of ability. For the pulse raiser, I use 3 or 4 dances a turn and repeat them. For example, a ceilidh dance or a routine I have choreographed. We then move on to joint mobilization, and again, these exercises must be suitable for all. I might teach an easier movement for newer dancers and a more challenging version for more advanced dancers. The final section is muscle strengthening, which is essential but often omitted. I do not include stretching in the warm-up. A muscle must be warm to be stretched, and at this stage of the class, the muscles have not had time to become sufficiently warm. Warm-up exercises can be found in the Society's booklet, An Introduction to Warming Up and Cooling Down for Scottish Country Dancing. I use a variety of music, including marches and waltzes. If I'm working with a musician, I will also use classical music, popular music, and songs from the shows. The next section of the class is step practice, focusing on 1 or 2 steps from the first dance. A dance such as the Starry-Eyed Lassie from Book 23 includes pas de basque, skip change, and slip step. I would not teach all 3 steps. Instead, I would focus on pas de basque, which is used in the double triangles. Transitions between steps and foot changes must also be taught. I would probably concentrate on the transition from skip change to slip step and back to skip change in the above dance. Skills exercises follow step practice. They are very beneficial, but keeping them simple and relevant to the formation is essential. Don't make them more complicated than the formation the exercise supports. For examination purposes, a skills exercise must be included in the lesson plan. But for an actual class, some teachers find it easier to only teach the formation, for example, the rondelle. However, teaching a small section of a formation as a skills exercise is usually beneficial. When teaching formations from a dance, I always adopt the same practice used in the unit examinations. Teach one formation in depth, letting each couple try, and then revise a formation that the class has been taught recently. For example, in the dance Mrs. MacLeod from Book 6, I would teach set 2 and turn corners as the primary formation, and then revise the reel of 3 with corners. The final section of teaching a dance is building it up or putting it together from bars 1 to 32. At this time, I introduce the original tune, and I'm careful to use the correct part of the tune for the bars I'm teaching. I shall say more about this later. As in Unit 5 examinations, I would teach the first couple or 32 bars in chunks of 8 or 16 bars, then all 32. It is often necessary to teach the 32 bars to another couple before dancing it 8 times. Although dancers should be secure in what they are doing, there is no harm in taking a few risks. If they think they can dance without another walkthrough, let them try. If it goes wrong, they can always start again. The teaching of the strathspey will follow a similar plan to the teaching of the first dance. However, if I have focused on the setting step in quick time, I would teach the travelling step in strathspey time. The dances I teach in the first hour, one quick and one slow, are not too difficult and focus on teaching steps and formations. I try to cover all the popular formations 2 or 3 times during a term. I also include lesser known formations such as the spoke or the tournée. I choose mainly popular dances that appear on programmes, but I occasionally use a less familiar dance as it's essential to keep the dances from the older books alive. In the next hour, the teaching is less intense, but the class is still reminded about the technique of formations, covering, and phrasing. I usually teach 5 dances in this class, starting with a jig, strathspey, reel, strathspey, and finishing with another jig, or starting with a reel and then strathspey, jig, strathspey, and finishing with another reel. I might include a new dance or a golden oldie as the 3rd dance. The first strathspey is usually an 8 by 32 and the second 3 or 4 by 32. The class is also taught medleys and dances that use square and 5 couple sets. The following is a typical lesson plan for one of my classes. Flowers of Edinburgh from Book 1 is the first dance. The step practice is pas de basque and travelling pas de basque in real time, and the formation I would focus on is the poussette. This is a dance that is appropriate for everyone. Next, I would teach the strathspey travelling step to a traditional strathspey, followed by the formation turn corner partner, and a revision of reels of 3 on the opposite side and then on own sides. We would then dance Balquhidder strathspey from Book 24. After the break, I would change the rhythm to jig time and probably teach a dance from the latest RSCDS book. For this lesson, the Aviator from Book 52 is being taught. The geography is more complicated and the concepts of covering and phrasing can also be honed. To give variety to the lesson, the penultimate dance, City of Belfast from Book 48, is a 3 times through strathspey danced to a slow air. The Espagnole formation will probably need revising, and the ending to setting to corners often needs clarifying. I always finish my class with a well-known dance, returning to real time for the reel of the 51st Division from Book 13. New dancers will be adding another dance to their repertoire, and all dancers can practice the transition from pas de basque to skip change. Music is an essential part of Scottish country dancing, and dancers should be reminded about its importance. Some dancers only recognise that there are quick and slow tunes. Some do not appreciate the difference between jigs and reels. Without giving too much technical detail, I do give information about the music. At the very least, all dancers should be able to recognise a jig and a reel and the difference between a traditional strathspey and a slow air. If I have a musician and they are agreeable, I ask them to talk about the tunes for the dances and the history of the music. Occasionally, I have a musician play for the class, but most of the time I use CDs. The CD player allows me to vary the speed, and I can also cue 4 sections of the tune. This is very invaluable when teaching a dance, so that the correct part of the tune can be used. Looking ahead to when CDs are obsolete, if they aren't already, I shall use an app that allows me to vary the speed and mark the track. By marking the track, I can easily find and play the bars of music I'm teaching. For example, bars 9 to 16 or 25 to 32. The good thing about this is that the markers will remain on the track until I use the track again. Many apps are available, but I like AnyTune Mac, which costs around £30. I use coaching over the music and rhythmic counting extensively during my teaching. When the class is dancing the entire dance, I try to stay quiet, but coaching is sometimes necessary, even if it's just to encourage the dancers to keep dancing to a high standard near the end of the dance. The above leads me to the topic of feedback. This is an essential part of the learning process. Giving feedback is usually difficult for the new teacher, but it gets easier with practice. The situation will have some bearing on your feedback. For example, the feedback in a mixed class will be different from that given to a demonstration team. Some teachers are too generous with their criticism or praise. It is essential to be honest, but at the same time tactful. Here are a few tips that might help in giving feedback. Try to say something positive first. For example, that was a good try. You remembered where to go, but when you dance it again, aim to, when you did, but if you had done. Have you thought about, if you give a dancer negative feedback during the lesson, try to say something positive about their dancing later. A dancer shouldn't go home demoralized. Try not to pick on one dancer. Be specific in your feedback so that dancers know exactly what they need to change in order to improve. It is essential to be mindful of the division of time and the pace of the lesson. The warm-up will take about 10 minutes in the first hour, and the other 50 minutes will be spent on the first two dances. The second dance is usually an 8x32 strathspey, so I might use 20 minutes teaching the jig or reel and 30 minutes for the strathspey. It depends on how much teaching each dance contains. It is very important that enough time is left at the end of the lesson for the cool down. It shouldn't happen after the class's finishing time. Having taught the class for 16 years, I have learned what works well and what isn't so successful for me. I would like to share some methods that I have found helpful. It is better to be a facilitator rather than an instructor when teaching. What I mean by this is that Scottish country dancing usually follows the instructor or do as I say approach. It's the way we are trained to teach in the unit system. Whereas the facilitator method can make the class more involved. This is implemented by the teacher asking open-ended questions, making the dancers think and helping them understand and remember the skills being taught. For example, when teaching an allemande, ask the class where they are on bar 5, or what is meant by covering and phrasing. When the lesson plan is written for the Unit 3 or Unit 5 examination, the aims of the lesson are briefly listed. For example, the pas de basque and the transition to and from skip change will be revised. The formation, double triangles will be taught, and rights and lefts revisited, culminating in dancing Lady Dumfries from Miss Milligan's Miscellany. Very few teachers do this in their classes. At the end of the lesson, I like to know if my teaching was felt to be effective, and I ask the class to identify what they have learned. More advanced dancers can become frustrated if they are taught a formation from scratch, especially if it's something familiar. It is much better to ask them to dance, for example, a 3-couple knot, and see how they perform it. You never know, it might be perfect. When you have seen their strengths and weaknesses, you know what to focus on. When teaching steps, I follow RSCDS practice and use jig time for skip change and reel time for pas de basque. But of course, it is necessary to teach skip change to reel time and pas de basque to jig time. Similarly, when teaching strathspey steps, I would use a traditional strathspey. Still, occasionally I would change to a pastoral, slow air, or song tune, especially if the dance I am teaching uses that sort of tune. Inform the class of dance references and anything exciting about the dance without lecturing. The story of the society's history is fascinating. At the very least, everyone should know that Mrs. Stewart of Fassner-Cloyth and Miss Jean Milligan were the co-founders of the RSCDS. They can be introduced when teaching Mrs. Stewart's jig and Miss Milligan's strathspey. Some teachers overcome the problem of having a class of mixed abilities by teaching an easier dance to beginners and at the same time a more complicated dance to experienced dancers. This requires careful planning. Choose two dances, one easy and one more complicated, that use the same rhythm, jig, reel or strathspey. Both dances should have the same steps and main formations. For example, the Deal Among the Tailors and Push About the Jorum, both from Book 14. The dances include pas de basque, skip change and slip step, allemande and 6 hands round and back. This could work well if the dances do not have an original tune. However, in relation to the above dances, while Push About the Jorum is unfamiliar, the Deal Among the Tailors is very well known and should only be taught to its original tune. It would be better to find two dances with similar steps and formations that don't have an original tune. When beginners have mastered basic formations, start to teach them easy popular dances that they will encounter at dances so that they build up a repertoire. Teachers should not need to be reminded about the importance of demonstration. Remember the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and the quote by the philosopher Confucius, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Some teachers are hesitant to demonstrate because of their students are better dancers than they are. Demonstration of steps and formations is essential, and there is no reason why a teacher cannot ask for a good dancer to demonstrate for them. Students appreciate learning dances from forthcoming dance programs, especially a new dance or one that hasn't been danced recently. Expectations as a teacher can vary depending on the level of a dancer. For example, in a reel of 3 with corners, expect beginners to achieve the correct geography, intermediates to be able to execute the accurate geography with better phrasing, and the corners dancing straight into place on bar 6. Experienced dancers should be able to do all of this while also demonstrating the concept of covering. As previously stated, the mixed class includes dancers of different ages, different abilities, and have different reasons for dancing. Because Scottish country dancing is a team effort, what one person does affects others. So it is important that all dancers can perform the formations correctly and with reasonable phrasing. For example, if a dancer is early or late, the enjoyment of the other dancers is spoiled. However, when footwork is considered, some dancers do not execute the steps accurately through age, ability, or inclination. If dancing is started later in life, it is more challenging to achieve the desired amount of turnout and extension the steps require. Do remember that you are teaching a mixed class where there will be some dancers who have the ability and desire to improve. In the past, at day and weekend schools, the number of participants would have been sufficient to have graded classes. But nowadays, reduced numbers generally only warrant 1 or 2 mixed classes. Some teachers will look at the general standard and feel that teaching technique is futile. I take the view that everybody must gain something from the session. So it is important not to teach to the lowest common denominator. Dancers have paid to attend, and the teacher should try to help them achieve their objectives. I hope this short talk has offered some help in the teaching and management of a mixed class. The most crucial point to remember is that all participants should gain something from the class, whether by learning steps and formations, improving one's technique, or learning a new complicated dance. Preceding the main class with a session for beginners and leaving the last hour for experienced dancers are methods worth considering. Remember that you are teaching a class. As with all teaching, this involves the dancers learning skills, the teacher giving feedback, and encouraging the dancers to improve. I hope you enjoy teaching your mixed class. Thank you.